Hello, everyone. Let's see. Welcome to Aegis Flow. You're a supporter now. Thank you. Hello, everyone. And let's see if this is working. Let's see. Hello. Is that working? We can always hope it is. We can always hope. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, John Shea. Hello, Anouk. Hello, Bijan. I've got a couple of members out tonight. Thank you. We've got Carl Gasberg. I just realised that next year is the centenary of the Latter-day Biplane. Oh, good lord. Albazaski, good evening. Yes, praised be the mighty Blackburn. Carl Gasberg. 100 years. You know, you lot take it a little bit too far occasionally, I feel. I'm just worried. Thus another conclave of the Church of the Holy Biplane has begun. I worry if any of my academic peers watch this sometimes. I don't mind. While we're on the subject of that particular biplane, just a quick reminder, as you all know, currently familial bragging rights are at stake. If I can get to 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st this year, my aunt and uncle will have to wear Blackburn. I've agreed to wear Blackburn face masks in a photo, which will come out on the 2nd of January. So, please, I know it's double my subscribers. I know it's a lot to ask. But if all my subscribers managed to find one other person, I'd be most of the way there. So please, anyone you can think of, it's all good. And it's all for familial bragging rights, which is always a good thing to be in. Hello, Guido R. Hello, Frederick Vego. Hello, John South. Hello, Furry Kitten. And hello, Dan Freeman. And Animal 16365, thank you. Hello. And if anyone's wondering who I'm reading out, because I have received a couple of questions going out, if you open the live chat, which is usually on the side of the screen, I think it's that side of the screen normally, you should see them running around. And if you want to chat and talk away, please do go in there and chat away. I will see the chat and I will say hi. That's normally what I do. Hello, you're enjoying having the emojis, I see. And hello, Zachary Gherkin. Hello, everyone. Right then. I haven't managed to get round to posting the Patreon for votes today, literally because I have spent the day having an argument with the internet, and I have pretty much relayed the entire cable from my office to the internet hub. And we've got an engineer coming out next week as well because of the internet going down. It's been brilliant fun. I'm asking you, should we start creating fake Gmail accounts and start subscribing? I would never ask anyone to do that. For starters, it'd be a very dishonest way and bad juju to win the actual bet. So, I want to do this as honestly as I can. And honestly, if I was going to descend to those levels, I'd do it myself. But no. Oh, thank you for the offer. Good evening, Ian Carr. Good evening, everyone. Hey, just like you're really having fun with the emojis. I'm think with you joining, I'm now about 3 away from being able to add in another emoji, and goodness knows what I'll come up with for the next emoji. Because I've got 3 aviation ones, 2 ship ones, and 2 just general ones, including, of course, a Beef Wellington. Hello, Mike Softco. Hello, everyone. So, you'll notice the introduction video hasn't loaded today. That's because when I started it loading this morning to be up and so it would come online for 1 o'clock, it said it would take 4.5 hours. It actually has finished loading as of 2 minutes ago. So it's going to go live at 9:30 when probably this will be over. If it's not over, it'll go live and everyone will be able to watch it as well as watching me live. Which would be weird. I'm not sure. Internet here in America is mediocre to terrible at best. There's the case for most people. Theoretically, we have fiber optic broadband. Theoretically. It was a very interesting conversation between me and our service provider, with them trying to tell me that it must be Wi-Fi signal, and me pointing out that the entire connection is a hardwire cable, because I have so much faith in their Wi-Fi. At which point they really started crying. The Batman was retired after it had succeeded in scaring Poseidon, Neptune, and Albaicin into obeying the London Naval Treaty. Oh, good lord. Right. I was going to save this for later, but I think I'll do this now quickly before we begin. There you go. This is the latest design which has appeared on the lovely Spreadshirt site for you all to get, and please do notice there may or may not be something in that picture. It's up for you to figure it out. But you can buy that as a t-shirt now, and a mug, and various other things if you want it, on the Spreadshirt link down below. John South, fibre in the UK is nothing compared to the fibre I have in Poland. Germany as well. When I was back in the UK, I missed Poland's I missed Poland's BB. Oh, hello, Rick Vasava. Hello, Congress. I thought you would like that picture, Carl van Gasberg. Right then. So, it's World War I armoured cruisers of the Mediterranean. Let's start off with the first point. This is the Mediterranean. Okay? Now, everyone, we can all agree that is the Mediterranean. One of the most confined water spaces in the world to earn the title of sort of one of the big seas. And when I say one of the big seas, I mean the Mediterranean covers that whole area, but it's not exactly a space where you have a lot of room for maneuver. It's not exactly a space where you are able to be flexible. It is a good transit space. It is a good transit space. But you have the Tyrrhenian, the Adriatic, the Ionian, the Aegean, occasionally the Balearic, if depending on which map you're looking at. Seas in there. You have a very much a western and an eastern Mediterranean, with pretty much Malta sitting on the dividing line. This is the world you have in the Mediterranean. This is the Mediterranean. And into this world comes various armoured cruisers. Now, I'm going to start off by discussing the actual numbers of them, okay? I'm just going to give you an overview before I get into the details of armoured cruiser, because I'm trying to be nice and kind where I can be. Hello, Greg Sapowski. So, you have these of the Entente. They're basically, I'm using that for France and Italy, of which France has 22 armoured cruisers in service. 16 have been completed after 1900 or later. And the ones which serve in the Mediterranean are the Admiral Shana class, well, about 3 of them, Ponfou, Jean d'Arc, Duplex, Gloire, Marseillais of Gloire class does. The Leon Gambetta class, pretty much all of them do, but, well, let's put it this way. The Admiral Sharma gets sunk by torpedo, and Leon Gambetta gets torpedoed by a submarine as well. It seems to be that the namesakes of classes do not always do that well in terms of France. Jules Michel, Ernest Onenan, which tend to be, by us, considered separate classes, but at the time were almost considered part of the same class, and the Edgar Quinet class, which are considered a separate class by them even then, but by many outside observers were going, you're just building the same ship again, with a different gun arrangement, but it's the same ship. We'll get into that. Italy had 11, of which 7 have been completed, 1900 later. Marco Polo, which would be sold in 1922. Vento Pisani class. Vento Pisani, of course, was stricken in 1920, and Carlo stricken in 1920. The Giuseppe Garibaldi class, one of the most successful exports the Italians had. Far more of them end up serving for other navies than actually serve for the Italians. And guess what? Giuseppe Garibaldi herself is sunk by U4. I think, honestly, this is going to sound strange. I think when the submarines of the actual Austro-Hungarian Navy were going out there, they were going, is it the leader of the class? Is it the leadership of the class? Nope, then we won't sink it. I'm for the leadership of the class or no other. That's my purpose. I will take out their leadership. I will not, the class namesake, I will not take out any other. I have standards, you know. And then comes along a German submarine and spoils the whole run because she takes out Amalfi of the Pisa class rather than Pisa. So basically, it's UB114, which is pretending to be U26, which just, you know, spoils the run. So it's the Arn Kaiserlich Marine, you know, they're just spoiling the fun for everyone. It's just terrible, you know. That they'd have dropped the standards. The Kaiserlich Marine dropping the standards. But is this a armor cruisers of the Med Navies or armor cruisers that did things in the Med in World War One? Armor cruisers that did things in the Med in World War One. Although to do that, we will have to do a lot of covering armored cruisers. Hello, Melanie 16014. Hello, and John South. I'm not sure if I said hello earlier as well. But no, it's going to be a fun thing, and as Bitchon has pointed out, it is kind of broken up by North Sea standards. Yes, the Mediterranean is. Now, here is Genesis. Oh god, I can't believe I'm looking at it. For France, for everyone of the armoured cruisers, and I'll get onto the other navy's armoured cruisers in a second, but Dupe de l'Homme. Oh my lord. Right then, so in the pre-recorded video, I did, of course, cover this in some detail, but as the pre-recorded video hasn't gone live, I'm going to start off with the June de Colle, and then I'm going to get into Dupe de l'Homme, and I'm going to have to stare at it for a bit. Now, the June de Colle, of course, starts off with a lovely artillery general, as all good naval history schools of force and strategy do, called Henry Joseph Paxons, who believes that the explosive shell guns he's invented in the 1820s, that these powerful guns on numerous small steam warships could destroy much larger battleships. Because, of course, the battleships themselves will not be carrying even larger guns. No. They'll just be carrying on the same way. And they continue this idea with torpedoes and torpedo boats, because, again, no one's going to just invent rapid-firing guns and torpedo boat destroyers. And, of course, a submarine fleet. And, again, no one's going to invent anti-submarine warfare. And as part of these strategies, those strategies were to destroy the enemy battle fleet. And then once you destroy the enemy battle fleet, your commerce raiders, your armoured cruisers, which will be fast enough to avoid anything they can't fight, strong enough to fight anything they can't avoid, will go plunder the seas. Where have we heard that description before? Fast enough to avoid anything they can't fight, strong enough to fight anything they can't run away from. Frigates in the 18th centuries. That was their point. This is not a strategy. This is my problem, the June de Colle. It is not a strategy. It is the genesis of what has become the excuse of strategy to this day. It's a technology. Now, what I mean by that is it's technology rather than a strategy. When we talk about modern aircraft, and this often comes up in modern systems, they're talking about stealth. Stealth's brilliant. Stealth will rule the world. Stealth allows us to do this, this, this. We will destroy the enemy in minutes using stealth. They'll never be able to hit us. Great. What do you do next? Well, you got stealth. What do you do next? This is the most important thing. Here is the reality of a strategy. If you have an actual strategy, you have a what you do next. Theoretically, for the Junicol, the idea was that the enemy battle fleet will charge it towards your harbours to blockade and give you a close blockade. You will then destroy them using your small ships with with explosive shells, and your torpedo boats and your submarines and your mines, because they'll be stupid and come lumbering straight into them. And then you will plunder the seas mercilessly with your raiders, and they will have nothing to match you. You can tell this is not a strategy because it relies on your opponent being an idiot. B, it relies on your theoretically superior maritime state not going, you know what, they're building all these ships. Perhaps we should build something like them just to see what they're like. And C, this is the other key thing you can tell it's not a real strategy. Whenever other people bring it up, in what I would call some of the more serious navies of the period, they're usually bringing it up as a reason to justify spending money. Because it works with politicians. But then when you look at their own internal naval debates, they're mostly spending their time ignoring it completely. Because the Junicol does work with politicians quite well. It works with anyone who isn't going to think what is next. And anyone who isn't going to think past the big spending bill. Because that's the big selling point of the Junicol. It theoretically gives you a powerful navy without you having to spend money on a powerful navy. So if you want to spend money on your army, not your navy, the Junicol is great. If you don't have the money for a large navy, you can go with the Junicol and you can feel powerful. You can feel strong. It's like stealth. You can feel powerful. You can feel strong. Doesn't mean you have an actual strategy. Doesn't mean you have an actual strategy. And the classic example of this is the fact that the Dupe de l'Homme is really the first big ship built under this strategy. It's built in 1888. And it's supposed to be a commerce raider. And, well, yeah. Let's get into that. John South, French ships on 20th century. What happens when you have absolutely no restriction on drugs and your most popular drink at the time is absinthe? Yeah. Sorry, I'm sorry. Can I only send you a digital burger? I still enjoy my leftovers from last night. That's cruelty. That's happened. Cruelty. Although I had a nice burger last night as well, so I can't really begrudge you. We won't get into the Graf Spey. I was asking, you don't win wars by running away from the enemy. You don't, but you also don't win wars by charging blindly into their minefields. Oh, right then. Eric Kaufman, hello. Haven't been live such a couple months. Life is hard. I'm glad you're here today then. So, the Dupe de l'Homme, let's be honest. She is laid down in July 1888. She's launched in 1890. In fact, she's laid down in July 1888, launched in October 1890, and finally commissioned in May 1895. So, in true French standards, she takes 7 years to build. I'm just gonna mention this now because, frankly, it's worthwhile considering. that the Royal Navy, in comparison, building what they would call a first-class cruiser, and technically they're armoured cruisers, well, considering she starts in 1888, let's say she's there at the RN respond to her slightly later. You're probably dealing with the Blake class, maybe the Edgar class. Yeah, let's go with the Edgar class. Let's go with them. They probably Edgar class are probably the response because they're laid down in 1889, and yeah, HMS Edgar is laid down in 1889, launched in 1890, and completed in 1893. Hawk is laid down in 1889 and completed in 1893. Eddieman is laid down in 1889 and completed in 1894. Royal Arthur, 1890, completed 1893. Gibraltar, 1889, 1893. So basically, the British built an entire class of armoured cruisers, sort of armoured cruisers, in the time that the French build one ship. I don't want to sound cruel here. You then have the powerful class, which you can say are even bigger and are probably an even bigger response, and they're frank to her, and they're frankly evil in comparison. But let's do that. Let's look at the British response. So, the French have built this cruiser, which is going to be more powerful, faster than everything else. It displaces 6,300 tons. It has a length of 114 meters between its perpendiculars, which means from that end of the ram to the end. It is a draft of 7 meters, 10 centimeters, 7.1 meters. Its power comes from 11 Armoured fire tube boilers, which drive 3 triple expansion engines, generating roughly 14,000 metric horsepower, and deploying that all over 3 shafts for a top speed of 20 knots. Designed top speed. Her real life top speed was rarely 20 knots. She has a range of 4,000 nautical miles at 12.5 knots, and a complement of 521. And now this is the point at which I will start being very, very rude about the entire armoured cruiser concept, because here is the thing. Standardization has existed for a long time at this point. You go to Napoleonic navies, you go to the Nelson, any period, you go back freaking to the Tudors. You have standardization starting to creep in on ships. For cannon, you have an entire deck. They're all, broadly speaking, the same cannon, loading the same balls. And next deck up, same cannon. You might have freedom, but it makes sense. This has an armament of 2 194mm guns, that's 7.6 inches. 6 single 164mm 6.4 inch guns. 4 single 65mm, that's 2.6 inch guns. 10 single 47mm, that's 1.9 inch guns. And 4 single 37mm, that's 1.5 inch guns. Plus 4 450mm, 17, that's 17.7 inches torpedo tubes. 100mm belt, roughly 4 inches. A deck armor of 30mm, that's 1.2 inches. A conning tower of 100 with 125mm of armor, so 5 inches. And gun turrets of 100mm of armor, so 4 inches. That thing is not that well armed. It really isn't. It's really not that great. It looks impressive till you see a full battleship. And then let's talk about the British response as well. You have a choice. It's either the Edgar class, which we're building at the same time, or we can say after it's completed, it's the Powerful class. The Powerful class come in at 14,400 tons. They are 164 meters overall length. They have a beam of 21.6 meters, a draft of 8.2 meters. They have 25,000 indicated horsepower from 48 Belleville boilers driving 2 triple expansion steam engines and 2 shafts for a top speed of 22 knots. So then go 2 knots faster than they actually can do it. They can do 7,000 nautical miles at 14 knots. 5,000 at 12.5, or 7,000 at 14 knots, which is probably better. And they are armed with 2 single 9.2 inch, that's 234mm guns, 12 single 6-inch guns, 16 single 12-pounder, that's 3-inch or 76mm guns, depending on who you are talking to, 12 single 3-pounder, that's 47mm or 1.9-inch guns, and have 4 450mm or 18-inch torpedo tubes to the British. Her armour is between 64 and 102mm thick. The barbettes are 152mm thick. The turrets are 152mm thick. The conning towers 305mm thick, and the casemates are between 51 and 152mm thick. And the Royal Navy builds 2 of them. And they literally lay down Powerful in 1894, before this has come into service. Launch her in 1895, and she's completed in 1897. Terrible is laid down also in 1894, launched in 1895, and completed in 1898. The point I'm making here is that the French are pursuing a policy which really doesn't make sense. They're trying to compete with the British, but it's a case of it's not even the Kaiserlich Marines dreadnought building program. It's, what are you doing? And it just, this is the basis of the armoured cruiser, and the problem with the armoured cruiser is this. Its concept included the idea that this thing could take on some of the older battleships. Really? You want to fight an older battleship in this? You might well win, but you'll get damaged, and if that's a surface raider, that's the first thing you don't want to do, because guess what? With all those different guns and all those other components there is no way you are carrying enough spare parts to repair anything that goes wrong on that ship. No way. Basic Logistics 101. If you want to build something that's supposed to operate at long range and do surface raiding, you want to minimize your logistical issues as much as possible. You want as much standardization as possible. And again, this is not stupid, and this is not new in 1888. This is stuff which has been around since the Romans, since Admiral Z went to sea. Basically anyone who's ever thought through what they were going to do at sea, or even on land, has gone, you know what? Yes, I could order 90 different versions of that, or I could order 90 of one version. And gone with the 90 of one. Death Squad, go back to the Carthaginian Wars and you have standardization and distributed parts assembly. Yes. Frederick, well, against a bunch of British fishing boats, it may have a chance. I'm not sure if that ram gets caught in enough nets, it could cause all sorts of troubles. Derp Squad, I'm not jumping on that. It just doesn't work. It's not a sensible thing. so let's get into it. On the armor cruisers in the Mediterranean, you then have the most absurd armor cruisers built at all. Cos. Before we get into this, let's go all the way back to this map. And as you all know, Austria-Hungary is right at the top of the Adriatic, right up there. Okay? So, the point of a armor cruiser is that it's fast enough to get away from its enemies, but that it can fight it, but powerful enough to fight the enemies that it can't get away from. Here's the problem. Where are they going to get away from in the Adriatic? Where? Where do you go in the Adriatic? I know people are going to turn around and go, yes, but they could have been beyond the Adriatic. Well, beyond the Adriatic is the Mediterranean. Well, actually, technically, there's the Ionian. Then there's the Mediterranean. Not a lot of space for freedom of maneuver. You're basically going to have to fight your way out. If you want to do commerce raiding on anyone, the Austro-Hungarians are likely to end up fighting. You are going to have to go through the Adriatic, the Ionian, and the Mediterranean. If you're fighting the Italians, you're fighting in the Adriatic. That's not a good place for an armored cruiser. It's no place for it to run. There is literally no place for it to run. Where's it going to go? You know, seriously, we get to this, and I'm sitting here looking at this, and the whole point, when I was looking at this, and I've talked about this in the recorded video, when that goes live, you'll notice it. I do a comparison with the Radetzky class, pre-dreadnoughts, and I go, the question is more, why didn't the Austro-Hungarians, who I have a lot of respect for, build a class of pre-dreadnoughts instead? The St. George, because the St. George is a lovely ship. You know, I'm not going to sit here and go, the St. George is not a lovely ship. It's, 7,406 tons designed load, full load, 8,200 tons. It's 124 meters long. It's 19 meters wide beam. It's got a draft of 6.83 meters, or near enough makes no difference, nearly 7 meters. It's got 15,000 indicated horsepower. It's got 2 4-cylinder triple expansion engines driving 2 screw propellers and a top speed of 22 knots. Lovely. I could go through the gun list, though, and get very, very depressed, but will not do that, because the gun list is incredibly depressing. It's 2 9.4-inch or 24-centimeter guns, and then 5 7.5-inch or 19-centimeter guns, and then 4 5.9-inch or 15-centimeter guns. And you go, so you have a primary, a secondary, a tertiary battery. Oh, and then you have all sorts of other guns for dealing with other things. Basically, the armoured cruisers start to come to this idea that what they do when they're building them is they just get a huge pile of guns, whatever they can grab, and they chuck them at the hull. And whatever is still on the hull after they finish chucking them is what's going to get being fitted. Okay? I honestly cannot describe it in any other way. This is how armoured cruisers seem to be designed. Basically, any gun which crosses the designer's desk while they're putting it together gets go, oh, we could put a couple here. We could put a couple there. Sorry, that is the fluffy research assistant making his voice and views known on this particular topic. He's not particularly pleased with them. Vision, as a 3-year-old civilian, I do think Doopy de Loom looks cool. I don't think you're free. Don't go. Shormack is obviously not here, or I'd have been bopped on the head when he was over by now. Take care, Nook. Take care. Thanks, Stafford. Jennifer, good evening. Good evening. Feed us on. Current canal to escape? It's unusual escape route. It's just... No. There's no way. Common government. AH armor cruisers were either mission ships, one almost got in a firefight with a battleship, or in wartime, an addition to the battle force as anti-screen units. Either way, they don't make sense for Austro-Hungary to build. Nail Construct. I save money by using freebies from the arm manufacturers. Yes, it might be one or two of each caliber, but I think of the savings. Yeah. It must be bad if the FRA has taken our funds. Well, you know, what can I say? Let's calm down a bit, as he looks a bit stressed. Well, on. You've got your toys here, Squeak. Good boy. Good boy. Yes, he does find them slightly disturbing. Hello, Richard Orta. Take the trireme, make it of steel, arm it with modern guns, and have the engine power the oars. What role does this abominable stage take in the Mediterranean Sea? Probably more sense than the armoured cruiser. Probably more sense. And now we have the British. Oh, you want to come for this one? Okay, so as presented by the FRA. Hello, everyone. So the British build 57 armoured cruisers, and 35 are completed in 1900 or later. You're showing a little beard to everyone. You've got a little goatee on the front. And so, with this amount of force and this huge number of armoured cruisers, if they were useful to have in the Mediterranean, you'd expect the British to supply a plentiful number of them. But here's the thing. The British don't. In January 1916, having had pretty much none in there before, they eventually have risen to having the number of Edgar, Endymion, Euryalus, and Grafton there. So they have 4. In January 1970, they have Edgar, Endymion, Grafton, and Theseus there. In January 1918, they have Edgar, Endymion, and I think Grafton and Theseus. No, they do have Grafton there. But she's now in the Red Sea. So she's technically there from a command standpoint, but let's be honest, she's not there. And then we have in November 1918, well, Edgar's back in the UK, so while she's still on the list, she's not really there. And Endymion and Grafton are in the Mediterranean. So, someone has obviously looked at the armoured cruiser and gone, you are not for the Mediterranean. You are for many other areas. The armoured cruiser actually makes sense of British for trade protection purposes in the Mediterranean, in the Atlantic, and in the Indian Ocean, and in all the other stations around the world where it doesn't want to have to have lots of battleships. But you know, it's the thing. Oh, the narrator. Thank you. That's for Raleigh's dinner. I'm taking it. Thank you, King George V. Hello, Paul. Hello, Malaga. Well, on the bright side, at least the Austro-Hungarian ship is less hideous than the French abomination you showed before. That is true. That is true. They had got the Austro-Hungarians rarely produce ugly ships. In fact, I can't really think of an ugly ship from the Austro-Hungarians. I'm sure they tried at certain points. Every navy tries to produce an ugly ship every now and again. You're not drinking my iron brew. I know you think you're in charge out here, but you're not in drinking my drink. It's just it's not sensible for them for the Mediterranean. The armored cruisers are not Mediterranean systems. By the time got a fluff ball. Thank you. Sorry, fluff ball. The Mediterranean is not suitable for armored cruisers because there isn't the space for them to run away. And this is especially true by 1914. If you are going to run away, you want to be a light cruiser, which is a lot faster, because that can run away. If you're going to fight, you need to be a pre-dreadnought or a dreadnought, because those can fight, and can fight each other. The armoured cruisers, as said, are pretty much going to be used to mop up any enemy ships which have already been destroyed by the other ships. Well, that's not really worth 14,000 or 7,000 tons That's not really a ship worth having, saying, well, we can only use you when you're going to be mopping up other people after the other ships have dealt with them. Really? That's a lot of help. So, broadly speaking, these are ships which are, and how do I put this politely? These are ships which are suited for many operations. They are definitely, especially some of the latter ones, suited for commerce raiding and commerce warfare and make more sense in that role. But you have to almost think of them as, well, you have to think of battle cruisers as really the large armoured cruisers, or dreadnought armoured cruisers. And you have to think of armoured cruisers as, in many ways, the battle cruiser of the pre-dreadnought era. That's the role they're theoretically supposed to fulfill. The question is, you have to ask, is how well do they fulfill it? Dove's got armoured cruisers as convoy escorts in the Med. They could fight off most raiders. That's true. And that was really their job quite often. But again, who's getting out in the Med to surface raider to fight them? Let's be honest, one of the things we're going to be talking about is the Otranto barrage. And Otranto barrage, that's the blockade they're using to keep the Austrians in. And then your threat is Goeben and Breslau. Now, let's be honest, I wouldn't want to take an armoured cruiser up against Goeben. I wouldn't. Breslau, yeah, that'll be fine. It won't be pretty. They'll probably get heavily damaged, but Breslau probably will get heavily damaged as well. So it's not really a sensible scenario for either. But for Goeben, no. Which is why you have the pre-dreadnoughts out there. Because the pre-dreadnoughts can stand up to Goeben and go, yeah, you'll win, but the damage will inflict will mean you won't be going back. Thank you, Paul, in Poodle Pounds. Sure. A, we don't have status until we have an ugly ship. Try again. B, should we contract the French to build us one? A, that doesn't count. Oh, no. Hello, Hellshot. It's a cruiser. The armoured cruiser is... I try and make this point. It's a natural progression to have one. But when you have it armoured cruiser in terms of the definition as the Juna Cole was preaching, it just was never going to work like that. For starters, you can rely you're going to end up fighting one of the older battleships only. You know, especially when you're against the Royal Navy, which is the sort of Navy which is, and that's theoretically building on, but the Royal Navy in this period, from about 1880 to 1920, is the sort of Navy which gets confused one day and finds a whole load of other cruisers and various pre-dreadnoughts are sitting in Poole Harbour, which had forgotten existed. It gets notes from admirals of squadrons going, "Hello, sir, my Lord's Admiralty. What do you want us to do?" And the Admiralty goes, "Oh, we do have a squadron there. Oh, your dinner's arrived." About time to. Thanks, sis. There you go. Oh.
You not my when you walk past.
Yes, I will do. The dog is otherwise known as the Fluffy Research Assistant. Real name, Raleigh. But he enjoys going by Fluffy Research Assistant. Hellshot, would a battlecruiser work better? There is a reason why the British do send battlecruisers to Mediterranean. But that's really because by the time you've got World War I coming around, the battlecruiser is the new version, what the armoured cruiser was. And the British are turning up. And that's the other problem. It's like the Graf Spee. It's like the Battle of the Falkland Islands. Yes, the Germans had the better armoured cruisers. And they managed to win Coronel. That's true. They had the stronger fleet. But then Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the World War I versions, come across British battle cruisers at the Falkland Islands. And yes, we can say that if they hadn't tried to bombard the Falkland Islands, they might have got away. They might have found somewhere safe, but it's unlikely. And in the nicest way, they had no chance. The moment, there is the fact that Graf Spee, Admiral Spee, the commander of that force, which is arguably one of the best admirals, if not the best admiral the Germans had in World War One. Definitely far smarter than von Paul and Iganov. He estimated that if they ran into HMAS Australia, his entire force would have been wiped out. And that's because by the time of World War One, you do have battle cruisers around. So armored cruisers are no longer the raiding ship. They're now... And by the way, if anyone hasn't listened to this week's Bilge Pumps, which is out, having that question, what would be the better ship for World War II, a battle cruiser or a battleship? Well, I think I started out by pointing out that when World War One ends, the ships the Royal Navy's building are Admiral-class battle cruisers, although sometimes the Admiral-class are called the first fast battleships, and G3s. So the Royal Navy's already decided that any future war, which isn't going to be a close-in war in the North Sea, it's probably going to be decided by battle cruisers, because that's the point. Once you're dealing with the Pacific, once you're dealing with the Indian Ocean, once you're dealing with the Atlantic, the distances are so vast that speed matters. The only reason armor really, really matters is for if you're having fights where you can't duck them, where you're going to be having massive fleet engagements. And if you don't think you're going to be having Jutland again, which the Royal Navy didn't at the end of World War One, then that armor doesn't make sense. If you think you might end up fighting in the Mediterranean, which the Royal Navy does, then, because the Mediterranean is so critical to the British, they always going to need, then you still want some battleships, and let's be honest, that's what the M3s are about. M3s, those big battleships. The three of them would go, four of them, if the British had built them, would have dominated the Mediterranean. That was the RN's idea. We will have 18-inch armed battleships whose purpose is to wander up and down the Mediterranean and scare the bejesus out of anyone who tries to get in the way of us. That was their purpose. The G3s, they were for the Pacific. They were for possibly potentially dealing with Japan, because the British were thinking already about Japan because they were a bit... There was good things, bad things going on there. They'd been a bit interesting during World War One. They'd been a bit interesting before. I'm going to get back to that series. And all these things. So battle cruisers make a lot of sense. But the treaties happen. And... Hello. You finished your dinner and you want a biscuit as reward for finishing your dinner. Well, I can't see a problem with that one. And you do like service from style, don't you? You've got service here. Right, sorry. If anyone wonders what I'm talking to if they're just tuning in now, the fluffy research assistant is there. And this was the Ottoman fleet. And as you can see, the Ottoman Navy does something very sensible. They don't have any armoured cruisers. They have actually looked at them and themselves and gone, where are we going to send an armoured cruiser? Because again, if we go back to the Ottomans, they have the choice of the Black Sea or the Mediterranean Sea. Now, of course, they do have the Govan, which they convert into one of their ships. But honestly, that's a dreadnought, and a dreadnought of any type. There isn't much in the Black Sea that's going to fight it and beat it at that point. With the Mediterranean, again, they actually have more access to the Mediterranean than the Austro-Hungarians. They do. If you think about it, they go straight into the Eastern Mediterranean, which is a lot more spacious than the Western Mediterranean. And they have, theoretically, the whole of Egypt, etc., which is theoretically supposed to answer to the Ottomans, but by this point, the British had already pretty much made theirs. It's not a good scenario for a raiding ship. It just isn't. That's good. Space Force could have been very lucky. Would have had to have been very lucky to find a port. Yes, it would. Hello. You want to get back up, do you? Okay, come on. Up we go. All right. Right. Hello, County Face. Don't worry, Hellshot. Mm-hmm. That's good. Space Force would have had to been very lucky to find a port to refuel that where they wouldn't have been reported to the Admiralty within an hour or free of booking close-side. An hour? They'd probably been reported before they even got to the port. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Right. Ooh, hello. Hello. Yeah, can I reach the end? No. Now I can. So, let's look at some of these lovely armoured cruisers. Starters, we have the Chenier class, the Armoured Chenier class, and yeah, it's just there are problems. There are a lot of problems for the French. There are a lot of problems, and I would say this exemplifies the problems with it. Sorry, just bring up my notes because honestly, I can't do it the other way. I have got a big fluffy thing on my lap. You decided the lap's yours for the day. So, the Admiral Sharma class. Now, they're cute ships, but let's be honest, here's why I'm going to call them cute, because you've just turned out the great big Dupuis de l'Homme, which is 6,300 tons, beautiful power. And then you go, right then, I know, here's what's going to make this idea even better. Let's make it smaller. So, you have the Admiral Shana class, and they are built at 4,750 tons, broadly speaking. So, a nice 1,500 tons lighter. They're 110 meters long. They are 14 meters beam. They are 6 meters draft. They have 16 Belleville boilers, providing about 9,000 horsepower, with triple expansion steam engines and 2 screws for a top speed of 17 knots, so they're going to be running away from a lot. They've got a range of 4,000 nautical miles at 10 knots. And yes, these ships are built when HMS Powerful is already the Powerful and HMS Terrible are already in service. So it's just not fair. It's really not fair. They are possibly counterparts of the Diadem class. There's an interesting thing in that the British just continue building what they call first-class protected cruisers, which are pretty much their equivalent of armoured cruisers. But they don't really call them that. But they are. And it just gets worse for the French as you go on. As you go through, it just gets worse. Because this vessel's armed with 2 7.6-inch guns, 6 5.4-inch guns, 4 2.6-inch guns, 4 47mm, that's 1.9-inch Hotchkiss guns, and 8 37mm 5-barreled revolver guns, and 4 17.7-inch, that's 450mm torpedo tubes. They have a waterline belt of, well, between 60 and 90mm. Deck armor of 40 to 50 millimeters. The gun turrets have 92 millimeters, and the conning tower has 92 millimeters as well. Admiral Shana, she sunk, of course, by U-21 in February 1916. Bru and La Tocherelle survived till after World War One. Shanxi is actually wrecked in 1907 because the French ships have such brilliant handling and brilliant sea escapes. This is a case of we're already building, trying to build a powerful navy on the cheap. We're trying to do it as cheap as we possibly can while still claiming we're powerful. And now we're going to make it even cheaper. It's just, no. Darius Rousey, try doing anything with a cat that decided to lie down on your keyboard and mousepad with your hand on the mouse. Well, I think the poodle will probably try that if he thought he could get away with it. Van Hume, 16.5 inch would be next logical step for the RN to match everyone else. With 16. Then you go and get to 18 inch. Not really, because the RN's not in the business of matching people. They're in the business of overmatching them. Remember? They have to be the biggest and the best in the world. Otherwise, if they're not first rate, then the British Empire is at risk. So they can't go to 16.5 inch. It's not enough advantage over 16 inch. So their only option is to jump to 18 inch. But we'll leave that to one side. Vision, too bad the French Navy couldn't afford a copy of Brassey's or James. I'm sure they did have them, but they thought they were brilliant. With that ram, the French ship needs a bank of all of them to blend into them. Potentially. Graham Handler. The RN looked at the 16.5s for the G3s because that made sense for the G3s, which are supposed to be the battle cruiser variant. There's a reason the battleships are going for the 18 inch. The Royal Navy did, for some reason, go with 1.5 inch increments, but that was when they were jumping up. If you consider 15 inch compared to a 14 inch is a full inch and is a much bigger shell. We're going off topic, but I'll answer this one. Going to 16.5 when everyone else is at 16 is just not enough power. And as Dan Freeman has just pointed out, and as I've said before, it's 1.5 inches are something that logistics can more easily cope with as a stepping up in size. But the British were preparing for a far higher jump because they thought they needed to. And honestly, as I've said before, my instinct is that HMS Agincourt, the Queen Elizabeth class vessel, which is unbuilt, was going to be renowned eyes in terms of her length versus regular Queen Elizabeths, and was probably going to be armed with about 6 18-inch guns. Anyway, so this is the Sharma class. And I can honestly understand what happened to them because they are escorting troop convoys from North Africa to France for several months after beginning World War One, which is fine. That's a nice, good thing for them to do because, let's be honest, you don't want them doing anything else, but no surface raid is going to deal with them. And any submarine caught on the surface by that is not going to be alive. Unfortunately, then, Shana and La Touche-Treville are assigned to the eastern Mediterranean, where they take part in blockaded and controlled coast and support Allied operations there. Oh, that's okay. But at this point, Admiral Sharma takes part in rescuing several thousand Armenians from Syria, which he's good at. But is sunk in 1916 with only a single survivor being rescued because, believe it or not, she gets hit by the torpedoes and they take her down very, very quickly. So even in the cooler than you think, but warmer than the North Atlantic by a long margin, Mediterranean Ocean, it's only a single survivor who survives. Latouche Trevel is damaged in 1915 by an Ottoman shell while providing gun support in Gallipoli. And Bru was actually transferred to the Atlantic to support Allied operations against the German colony of Cameroon in September 1914. She then supports the Dardanelles before taking the role of patrolling the Aegean and Greek territorial waters. They have an interesting career, but honestly, here's the thing. At no point would you really call these ships first-rank ships in World War One. In fact, the odds are they shouldn't have even been in service. They've been commissioned in 1895 and 1896. You know, they had been designed in 1888. They've been laid down in 1889, 1890, and one in 1891. This is the trouble. The French don't have the capacity. They're kind of like, how do I put it? The French industrial capacity is a lesson for the Japanese and the Germans in World War II. The Germans, even in World War One, do not have the maritime infrastructure and industrial capacity to compete with the British. They really don't. They can produce some stuff, but they can't produce it in the same volume on the same speed as the British can. Not for the same cost effectiveness. The Japanese in World War II, and the Germans, of course, by World War II, are even more stricken because of the lack of their facilities and a lack of infrastructure they managed to build up. In fact, honestly, the Washington Naval Treaty kills Japan for World War II because it causes a 10-year building gap, which means the ships they had been building get stopped, which means the infrastructure they had been developing, the maritime support infrastructure they had been developing, stops. And yes, you can try as much as you can, but honestly, the cost of Yamato and Musashi is just devastating for them. And this is the problem for the French. They're trying to counter it by concentrating on the Junacol and the ideas which are supposed to allow them to compete with British battle fleet and be equal to it without having it. And you're sitting there going, it can't. And this thing, honestly, there are cruise liners which can outrun it. In fact, there are cruise liners not that long after this is built, which could probably run around it, sail around it in circles outside of its firing range. Let's go back a second. Outside of its range of engagement, laughing at it without it being able to actually damage them. And it's not the fault of the crews. It's the fault of the French government, which goes, right then, we've built the massive Dupuy de Lome. Let's try and build this cheaper. Because guess what? If you want to do any proper strategy and any proper things, you need to start thinking about what your strategy is. And this is the problem with technologies. They just don't answer the problems. Because they don't say what's next. Hello, we are now in front. Luckily, I have the questions on a second screen, but I'm not sure what's up actually on the main screen in terms of the picture. There we go. It's the Chevy Garibaldi class. Now, I like this class. I find them quite cool. I still don't like them because they're armoured cruisers. I have to say, the armoured cruisers are just a concept which I find quite disturbing in so many, many ways. But they are cool in that the Italians managed to sell 4 to Argentina, 2 to Japan, and 1 to Spain. Now, the one built for the Spanish gets sunk in the Battle of Santiago de Cuba, which, of course, is where the Spanish turn up with 4 armored cruisers and 2 destroyers. So theoretically, this should allow them to counterbalance the American, because according to the Junicole, the Americans who turn up with 4 battleships, 2 armored cruisers, and 2 yachts. Unsurprisingly, the Americans have 1 killed and 1 wounded, and the Spanish lose 4 armored cruisers and 2 destroyers. All sunk. I'm not saying the Spanish didn't have a chance, but I am saying that, frankly, the Junicole idea was not going to work. However, what interested me was the fact that the versions which the Italians go with are the bigger ones, which are roughly 7,700 tons. They are 111 meters overall length. They are 18.9 meters in beam. They are 7.3 meters in draft. They have 13,500 indicated horsepower and roughly 24 boilers, to supplying that to the 2 triple expansion engines, driving 2 shafts for 20 knots of top speed. They have a range of 5,500 nautical miles at 10 knots, which is excellent for the Mediterranean. They can basically go from one end to the other and back again. They have a complement of 555 officers, 578 when they're serving as flagship, which just shows you how small admiral staffs were in those days. 23 for an admiral staff? Good lord, imagine being able to run an admiral staff with only 23 people today. Just be amazing. However, here is the best thing I find about it, because only the Italians, who have love, emotion, and elan, and always project that when they're selling things, could have managed to sell as a good idea to someone buying who has any logistics officers which have any access to guns. The idea that we'll have 2 gun turrets, each with a forward and aft. One they will either have a single 10-inch gun or 2 8-inch guns. It was up to you. And then they'll have between 10 and 14 single 6-inch guns, and up to 6 4.7-inch guns, and 10 3-inch guns, and 6 1.9-inch guns, and 4 450mm torpedo tubes with 17.7-inch tubes. And they'll have a belt of 150mm, and a deck of 40mm, and a barbette of 150mm, and a conning tower of 150mm, and it'll all be fine. And you sit there and go, how, in the name of all things holy, did you get any logistics officer to sign off on procuring this without them having a heart attack? I just do not know. Oh. Vision. First USN armored cruiser was the USS New York, and it was last in commission, serving on the China Station as flagship into the 1930s. Yep. Dirt Squad. A transatlantic liner. Please turn around. Look out, getting dizzy. Mercy. Oh, they probably do it. Hello, Wayne Boren. I'm like, I bet he marks my report. I won't be that cruel. Dirt Squad. Isn't an admiral staff, in theory, everyone in the fleet they're commanding? They tend to have a staff to coordinate that fleet. Vision. That is 22 more staff officers than what General Robert E. Lee had. Yes, but Lee was just not that good. Of course, Wayne Boren. Of course, he can't see the screen right now. Richard Odd. To be honest, talking with your hands is a distraction. Well, my hand is all you can see. Oh my god. Did they put on a gun per class of ship they thought they might run into? I have honestly no idea. I can just imagine the fire control on them. And let's be honest, my favourite of them all, and there's a picture of her later, is Varese. I just think she looks cute. And she is a rather good cruiser. And she is literally armed with a single 10-inch forward and a pair of 8-inch aft. She's got 14 6-inch guns, 10 3-inch guns, 6 1.9-inch guns, and the 4 torpedo tubes. She also has gun shields added on, which have 50 millimeters of armor, because 50 millimeters of armor is going to help you a lot. It's not going to turn the shrapnel if it's hit by anything that's bigger than, I don't know, a 76 millimeter. Stop licking the varnish off the desk. It's not good for you. Now, the Giuseppe Garibaldis, they have all sorts of fun in World War Two. Well, one, I mean. She was assigned to Brindisi when in May 1915, and in June of that year, she bombarded the rail lines near Ragusa and departed Brindisi on the 17th of July to do the same near Ragusa Vershi the following morning. However, the next morning, her sister ship, of course, Giuseppe Garibaldi, was torpedoed by U-4. The torpedo actually passed between Veresi and Giuseppe Garibaldi, so it almost sunk her. So that would have disappointed the Austrian commander completely, because you don't sink the other ships, do you? You sink the lead of the class. That's what you sink. It's the status of it, isn't it? Yes, it is. It's a status. It's what the Austrians do. You know, they don't want to muck around with the other ships in the class. No, you sink the namesake of the class, don't you? Anyway, after that point, especially with the Amalfi sunk, the Italians start to restrict the activities of the ships based in Venice. And so in 1917, when the Austro-Hungarian fleet is preparing to attack the Otranto barrage, Veresi is actually in Botrino in the north coast of Corfu. She's not called back to Sortie in response to the Austro-Hungarian movements. They just decide armoured cruisers just aren't necessary for it. They have dreadnoughts. Stop licking. I don't want you licking the varnish off everything. It's not good for you. Sorry about that. So, the British ones. Because the British have armoured cruisers, and it's worthwhile thinking about the British armoured cruisers. So, we're starting off with the Cressy class. And they're considered a first-class armoured cruiser. So let's consider what are the British building, and these are built between 1898 and 1902. They are 12,000 tons. They're 143.9 meters long, so pretty much 144 meters. They have a beam of 21.2 meters and a draft that doesn't exceed 8.2 meters. They have 30 Belleville boilers, and they have 21,000. Therefore, thanks to their two triple expansion steam engines, they're deploying 21,000 indicated horsepower over two shafts for a top speed of 21 knots. Their crew is 725 to 760. They are armed with two single 9.2-inch guns. That's 234 millimeters. 12 single 6-inch guns, or 152 millimeters. 12 single 12-pounder, well, that's 3-inch or 76 millimeters, depending on your money you want to go with. And 3 single 3-pounder, or 47 millimeter guns. And 2 18-inch 450 millimeter torpedo tubes. Their belt is 2 to 6 inches thick. Their decks are 1 to 3 inches thick. They have barbettes, which are 6-inch thick. They have turrets, which have got 6-inch thick armor. Their conning tower has 12 inches of armor. And the bulkheads have 5 inches of armor. And the Royal Navy builds Cressy, Sutley, Abaca, Hogue, Baachet, and Euryalus. And of these, Cressy, Abaca, and Hogue, of course, all get sunk on 22nd of September 1914 when they're on patrol. And at which point the Royal Navy is considered terrible because they had, lost these 3 ships, and they must have, because they had such old ships in the service, they shouldn't have had them out to sea. Actually, it's because of a very simple thing. And I have to worry about this because the They were crewed by inexperienced reservists, and some people called them the live bait squadron because of this. Cressy, Hogue, and Abaco were actually sunk in 1914 by U9 on near the Dutch coast because what happens is the first cruiser gets hit by a torpedo. And then the two other cruisers decide to stop dead in the water, in order to pick up survivors. It's kind of like the Ark Royal and the damage control in World War II. The Royal Navy is a very large navy. And yes, that does help them in producing some very, very smart officers. They tend to have a large pool to pick from. But it also means occasionally you have people get into positions where they really, really shouldn't have been and make decisions they really, really shouldn't have been allowed to make. Nelly 16. Okay, freaking Count Clarkula. Did I earn that one? Kill said, hey, Huff don't. I get to watch while I'm stuck on the MBTA. General Grant had a nice staff. You see it in photographs. Yes. Have you already carried Olympia? No. Richard, that is how the Italians sold those ships. Yeah, to an extent. Rainbow, isn't that the most common command word for stop that? Leave and stop are usually the most common words they hear. Vision, Olympia is not an armor cruiser and not a med. Well, not for most of all, I think. No. I can't say, just gonna didn't know what area he was covering. It's the Mediterranean. Right. Dr. Trophonius. Hello, Dr. Trophonius, and hello, Colin's dad. Hope you're well. And I think I've said hello to everyone who's on here tonight so far. Hello, Felix B, if I haven't. Felix B, during the German-Danish War, the Austro-Hungarians operated in the North Sea because the Germans had no useful fleet. Maybe they thought that to use the cruisers there too. By this point, when they're building them, the Germans have cruisers. Did anyone survive in any of the three cruisers? As I understand it, the British had 1,459 people killed. And if you consider that their crew size is roughly 725 to 760, that means pretty much 2/3 of the crews involved died. Over 2/3, probably. It's not good. It's not a good battle. It's not a good thing for the British. And it's not something you would like to see done again. What's disturbing more so is that in 1954, the British government sold the salvage rights to the ships, and work began in 2011 on them. And I wasn't keen on that being done on Abaca, Hogue, and Cressy because, frankly, I don't think they should have been. But these are what governments do. And in 2011, the government was short of money. Oh, everyone could see stopping was a bad move. I have, people blame the Admiralty, they blame this, they blame that, but honestly, you can only really blame the officers on the spot, and that means the buck stops with the captains. Well, you wanted to get down. You don't want to get back up again. Oh, you want a biscuit. Whatever you do, don't tell your mummy how generous I am with these, okay? she'll tell me off. But Eurilius, of course, does actually end up in the Mediterranean and does quite well there. Let's see. She was actually supposed to be with them. And what's interesting is Eurilius's captain was normally the flag officer under the flag captain under Christian, and was probably one of the better officers in his group. And unfortunately, Eurilius has to return to port, and the fleet is sunk. However, she's eventually transferred out to the Suez Canal, and then she does a lot of work in Gallipoli and all those areas. And she does well out there. She does well in the Mediterranean because she's quite useful. At a certain point, they decide to try and convert it into a mine layer, but this ends with the end of the war. So let's look at some of the better French armoured cruisers. Now, the thing I'm going to say here is that really the French produce a class of almost 4 armoured cruisers. The trouble is, they are built in different yards. And as such, they are all different enough that people do sometimes consider themselves different classes. Also, they're fitted with different gun fits, as the French do start to work out things. The Mediteranean is laid down in 1903, launched in 1906, and completed in 1909. She has 42 Niccolo spoilers that provide steam to 3 triple expansion engines that drive 3 screw propellers with 37,000 indicated horsepower and give her a speed of 22 knots. This should be a very powerful ship. I was asking, oh my god, 3 gun decks. Those lowest guns must have been very useful. We'll get into this. She's armed with 2 twin 7.6-inch guns, 12 single 6.5-inch guns, 16 single 2.6-inch guns, 8 single 1.9-inch guns, and 2 450mm or 17.7-inch torpedo tubes. Her belt is 152mm at its thickest and 58 at its thinnest. Her primary gun turrets have 203mm of armour. Her intermediate gun turrets have 170mm of armour. Her tertiary gun turrets have just steel. Bulkheads 89mm, decks 46 to 66mm, and conning tower is a 203mm. And Bud Guy, Jack Ray, thank you for becoming a supporter. Thank you, Jack. Bud Guy 829. Hello, Doctor, watching this and the news of 11 Marines and a medic and 40 Afghans killed in 2 bombings in Kabul today. And our Zerp squad sort of said, those numbers on Afghan civilians are soft, double it, and add a 0 in the end for more realistic fit numbers. Probably not quite that bad. We'll hope not that bad. I don't know. The withdrawal from Afghanistan is not being handled well. And I'm not getting into that, but I will say this, because it's more of a bilge pumps issue. As I think I've said in bilge pumps, the logical thing would have been a handover to the United Nations. So NATO withdraws, the US withdraws, but UN would have maintained a peacekeeping force there to help stabilize the government and help continue the progress they'd made. And provide ongoing support to the Afghanis. But someone had a smart idea and wanted to bail. And those people have stopped thinking of the UN. So... hey-ho. Now, the interesting thing is that you get to the Edgar Quinet class, and they're really the next pair produced of these ones, and they are 14 7.6-inch guns. And they're built 1905 to 1911, 22.6-inch guns, and two 450mm 18-inch torpedo tubes. So here is the thing. If, and as it obviously seems they were, the French were capable of standardization at this point, why in the name of all things holy did they build this ship like this? Why? Why? If you are capable of understanding the idea of, let's build it, the Edgar Quinet class just are exactly the same. Exactly the same. Just instead of having those, I don't know what you call them, secondary guns, and then tertiary, they just have the primary and the tertiary. So they have the 2.6-inch guns, which are theoretically supposed to drive off I don't know what, because at the moment, at that time, I'm not sure what 2.6 inches is going to drive off in 1911. By 1911, most of the destroyers are carrying bigger guns than that, so honestly, there isn't much point going on here. But we'll leave that to one side. The fact is, 14 7.6-inch guns, that's good. Conrad, nation building takes a very, very long time, and it's a long-term commitment. This is why you hand it over to the United Nations. Let's be honest, I think... Yeah. To be honest, I was just looking at doing from memory. Currently, let's see, UN peacekeeping forces, they still have forces in Kosovo to this day. You think about it, Bosnia, Kosovo happened 20 years ago. The UN are still there backing them up. They have forces all around the world. In Western Sahara, Central African Republic, Mali, Congo, Golan, Cyprus, Lebanon, Cyprus, that's been going on for a long time, Lebanon, Aria, Kosovo, South Sudan, India, Pakistan, Middle East. They have UN forces all around the world. This is what you have the UN for. It's long-going, ongoing commitments. And in the nicest way, individual countries, if you don't want to do it, that's what you pay your bills to the United Nations for. And I know the Americans don't like to always pay their bills to the UN, but you'd have thought a Democratic president of the time that Biden's been in service would have thought, hang on, I want to leave Afghanistan, but I don't want it to immediately blow up in my face. I at least need someone else I can blame if it goes wrong. Hand it over to the United Nations. That would have been sensible. That would have been viable. But they didn't. But that is off the concept of the topic of armoured cruisers and the Juno Cod. Very much off the topic. Because that's what the United Nations exists for. You go in and do the initial fighting, which sets up the thing. As I said, strategy. It's the problem with my problem with Juno Cod. It's my problem with a lot of the things when we're using technology instead of strategy. When it's a technology. That's what modern warfare is often like. They are obsessed with the technology they can use, not with actual strategy. They don't think what's next. And this is the thing. They were just thinking, let's get the Americans out, not thinking what comes next. As I said, a United Nations peacekeeping force would have been a sensible thing to have going in there. Just make sure there are some people there, especially supporting and assisting the Afghans. Parabo 5. Looks like I won't be doing a master's in... Well, naval history will do. I'm glad naval history will do. Bud Guy, a German medical air force plane took a number of injured US servicemen away. That's kind of... Telling us, the UN forces, Russia, probably with tongue-in-cheek, asked several times for UN peacekeepers in Donbass too. Yeah. Well. Right then. It's just they build this, and then they build the Edgar Quinet class, and you sit there and go, why? Why are you even doing it? Honestly, the Edgar Quinet class are the last armoured cruisers which the French Navy built. And they are lovely ships. And one of them's wrecked in 1930, and the other one's scrapped in 1941 to between 1941 and 43. They end of service in 1911. They serve the Mediterranean and the Black Seas. They do all sorts of duties, but the point is, an armoured cruiser is the pre-dreadnought equivalent of a battle cruiser, but it's even less well thought through. The battle cruiser actually has some stuff which makes sense. And here we go. We are now at another British cruiser. And it's a warrior class. Now, these vessels, they are built between 1903 and 1907. So this tells you something. They're built between 1903 and 1907. They are pre-dreadnought, technically, in their construction. And they are armed with, well, they're, first of all, 12,790 tons long. So they're pretty much 13,000-ton cruisers, which tells you 10,000 tons is really, really going on the small side when you're asking for it as a limit in 1920. Whoever was pushing for that was very, very silly when it came to cruisers. They should have probably gone for 15,000 tons as the upper limit for heavy cruisers, and they should have probably gone for about 7,500 tons to the upper limit for light cruisers. Because if you think about it, you could build a light cruiser on 6,000 tons, 7,500 tons would have made more sense. It would have been half the heavy cruiser, and it would have made sense for it. Anyway, and you probably would have had a lot less cheating if everyone could build on 15,000 tons. 146.3 meters long in between their perpendiculars. Overall, 154 meters. The beam is 22.4 meters. The draft is 8.4 meters. The installed power comes from 26 boilers, providing 2 triple expansion steam engines with 23,000 indicated horsepower to drive 2 shafts for a top speed of 23 knots. Their range is 8,130 nautical miles at 10 knots. They have a complement of 789. They're armed with 6 9.2-inch guns, 4 7.5-inch guns, and 24 3-pounder guns. And they've got 3 18-inch torpedo tubes. Their armor is also very interesting because they have a waterline belt of between 3 and 6 inches thick, a deck of between 0.75 and 1.5 inches thick, barbettes 3 to 6 inches thick, gun turrets 4.5 to 7.5 inches thick. Depending, sort of the front at the front of the turret it's 7.5 inches thick. At the back it's 4.5. Conning tower 10 inches thick, and the bulkheads, depending on where they are in the ship, are 2 inches to 6 inches thick. And as you can see, they have it fitted so basically you're able to fire forward 9.2-inch guns, aft 3.92 inches guns. You're able to do control fire. Now, admittedly, if that had been me, and considering double turrets were already a thing at this point, I would have gone double 9.2-inch, double 9.2-inch, double 9.2-inch, double 9.2-inch, forward and aft, and I would have probably, instead of having those 7.5-inch guns, I'd have probably gone for some nice 4-inch guns so I don't have to worry with the 3-pounders. But that's me. Right. That is me. These are warrior class. They've run. Armor cruisers are only rented, not bought in the Med. You merely own it for a time until the sea claims it back. Generally, if that vessel is a funnel farm, I think the French one definitely was. This one's also all armor cruisers are pretty much funnel farms. Right, I won't be a second, but Raleigh's asking to go outside quickly. So, second. Come. And we're back. Ba-da-da-ba. Hello. So, those are fairly. Those are what I would call a fairly good design from the British. But this is another point. Again, the armored cruiser is theoretically the centerpiece of the Juno cause. What comes next? Because the first thing is to destroy the enemy battle fleet using your submarines, your torpedoes, your torpedo boats, all these things, minefields, and then your armored cruisers go out. But the French armored cruisers, I would consider, are consistently outclassed by their British counterparts because they always can be. So the answer would be, what could you have done instead if you'd been the French? Could you have built better battleships than the British? Well, that's the thing. If you can't build the numbers of the British, then you do have to build better quality than the British. You have to put your money where your mouth is and go for quality, which is what the Germans try to do. Again, do not tell your mummy. I'm quite such a soft option. But the French don't. The French try to get it on the cheap because really they have a problem. They have to focus on their army because they have a border with the emerging Germany, they have a border with the emerging Italy, and they're not sure what bits they might get carved off next. Carl Gasman, if the Achilles had dual 9.2s, 4-inch, fore and aft, and ditched the 7.5s, they would have been as good as it gets. They would have been. Let's go. Carl Gasman, as a French artifort, didn't they have overpressurized boiler rooms? Didn't it contribute to their quick sinkings if torpedoed? That is an issue they have. But for overdraft, all boiler rooms are effectively force pressurized. Effectively. As Dirt Squad says, we do get the politicians we deserve. I was once told by someone that basically it's your own fault if you don't pay politicians enough because you won't get people who are good and people who are smart or capable. And I sat there and went, well, yes, you do have to pay politicians a viable wage, but you also, but people don't go into politics for money. They theoretically they should go into it for public service. And if they're not going into for public service, then perhaps that's because the ones who do good service aren't being talked about enough, but the ones who are probably a bit less than good do get talked about a lot. And the Sankt George, which you already talked about a little bit earlier, but it's worthwhile considering what she gets up to in World War One. It is worthwhile. Because in World War One, she takes part in the Battle of the Strait of Oltrano and the Catarama Mutiny. The German, basically at the beginning of World War One, the Goeben seeks the safety of the, which she'd been assigned to the Mediterranean division, but the Royal Navy has literally 3 battle cruisers there hunting for her and all sorts of things that turn up hunting for her. So she seeks the protection of the Austro-Hungarian fleet, and Admiral Anton Huss sent the fleet, which included St. George, south on the 10th of August, to assist the Goeben, and Admiral William Suschen intended to use the Austrian-Hungarian move as a feint to distract the British Mediterranean fleet, which was pursuing Goeben. Suschen instead, of course, goes to Constantinople, and the Mediterranean, the Austro-Hungarian fleet withdraws without engaging British forces. However, with the Italian declaration of war in 1915, the St. George takes part in the operation which bombards their Italian coastal targets, including she's escorted by a pair of torpedo boats. Amazing! We're going to use torpedo boats to destroy these ships. No one will think of the idea of bringing their own torpedo boats with them to protect them, will they? Junicol. And shelled the city of Rimini. She managed to take out, well, severely damage a railroad bridge, but wasn't engaged by any Italian forces. There wasn't really anything in the area to engage her. And then after that, the Austro-Hungarians basically concentrate on being a fleeting being, tying down Allied naval forces. With House aiming for the this of course is Admiral Anton House aiming for the idea that, using torpedo boats and mines, he could reduce the numerical superiority of the Italian fleet before a decisive battle could be fought. Which is, of course, the Juno-Cole strategy all over, and the Japanese strategy for World War II. We're starting to see a theme here. Powers which know they're already outnumbered and outstrengthed sort of seek this. It's interesting enough, again, of course, that as I've talked about before, the British have a similar strategy going into World War II for any fleet or any of their exposed fleets to fight that strategy until the main battle fleet turns up. It's not their strategy for the main fleet, but it does shape a lot of their capabilities. That and their ability, their aim for night fighting, because they aim for it for the whole fleet as well as these forces because of the experience of Jutland and the Germans escaping by night. That means the British are even more paranoid about night, but the night attacks and the night capabilities of night flying are specifically about whittling down your enemy forces before you have to fight them, especially if you're one of those forces which are deployed out on the fringes of Empire and are going to have to defend the area until the main fleet arrives. The thing is, that's the British strategy on that case, is till the main fleet arrives. And then they will move forward and try and implement blockade, fight a battle, those sort of things, and bring your enemy to the negotiating table. It's not the whole strategy. It's not, we will whittle them down and then fight a big battle, and then what? This means that she's around to take part in the Battle of the Strait of Otranto. St. George is deployed to support the three light cruisers commanded by Captain Nicholas Hoffy. That's Novara, Seid, and Helgoland. They raided the Antra barrage in the southern Adriatic in 1917. After completing their attack on their defences, the cruisers turned north before being engaged by British and Italian warships, including HMS Dartmouth. Hoffy, of course, calls for reinforcements, and St. George sorties accompanied by 2 destroyers and 4 torpedo boats. Basically, the aim was that St. George would cut off the weaker Allied cruisers and destroy them. However, St. George is steaming as her best space to get to the battle. Unfortunately, Novara is hit by shells from Dartmouth. That reduces her speed, and she soon breaks down. And then the Allied warships break off the engagement because they see on the horizon the steam of the Austro-Hungarian reinforcements, which just aren't able to come up fast enough. And the fact that this is the point, they see the steam when St. George is still 25 nautical miles away. At this point, while the major cruisers of the Allies are withdrawing, the Italian destroyers, of course, closed Novara and her sister ships. And whilst heavy Austrian-Hungarian fire drives them away, they come very close, very, very close to causing severe damage. St. George eventually does escort them all home and gets all the Austro-Hungarian cruisers home, but you have to wonder why they didn't have her closer to begin with, why she had to be sortied, why they didn't have her ready to go closer than where the operation was taking place. Because if you are depending on her as your backup, she should have been closer. In 1918, of course, the Catraro mutiny breaks out. And they even seize control of the Sankt George, and the executive officer gets shot in the head. They managed to get the mutiny under control. And, basically bring in some pre-dreadnought battleships to get them under control. And Sankt George herself ends up being given to the British as one of the war prizes under the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye. And the British still had to break us because they just don't see the point in her. So, this is the Italian cruisers. The Amalfi and the Pisa. Now, the fact is, the Italians produce good cruisers. The Amalfi and the Pisa are very good in many respects. They are 9,832 tons. They're 140 meters long. They're 21 meters in beam and between 6.9 and 7 meters draft, depending on who you believe. They have 22 Belleville boilers, 2 shafts, powered by 2 vertical triple expansion steam engines, and 20,000 indicated horsepower for 23 knots. But they have a range of only 2,500 nautical miles at 12 knots, probably fine for the Mediterranean. They're armed with 2 twin 10-inch guns, or 9.2-inch guns, depending on which ship you're talking about, 4 twin 7.5-inch guns, 16 single 76mm or 3-inch guns, and between 8 or 4 1.9-inch 47mm guns, and 3 torpedo tubes, and a decent-sized belt of 200mm. They do well. Take care, Connor. This is Dad. Alright. Bathroom. Honestly, I have a big fleet backing up. I would just like to be able to point that at them at whoever was nasty me rather than have them avenge me. That's sloops on distance stations. That's pretty much the British policy. After Arcona, there was a few months using armoured cruisers bombarding shore targets. SMS St. George revisited Rimini in June, but it took the Italians the Giuseppe Garibaldi to return the favour. With on Taranto in 1917, the SMS and St. George being close event, they might have been spotted by Italian flying boats. They might have been, but there is that versus the fact that they would they would be more protection for their cruisers, and you might well have had British cruisers severely damaged. Now, of course, as said, Amalfi is sunk in July 1915 by a German submarine, just, ruining things. Pisa and Amalfi both take part in the Italo-Turkish War of 1911 to 1912, supporting the occupations of Tobruk, Libya, and several lines in the Dodecanese. Amalfi actually goes off and blockades Tripoli and supports the occupation of Derna in Libya. In 1912, they bombarded the fortifications at the entrance, defending the entrance to the Dardanelles. So the point I would like to make is, in a nice way, as much as fault as you have to consider the British take for the Dardanelles and for bombarding them before they turn up to arrive with troops, the Italians had bombarded them all the way back in 1912, and the Ottomans hadn't done much about it since. What's also interesting is that Pisa and Amalfi are ordered in 1905, launched in 1907, and completed in 1909. The Georgios Avrov, which is still a museum ship to this day and worthwhile going and looking at if you can get to it. And it's a Greek museum ship now. is slightly different. Because she's built for the Greeks straight off, and they have some slightly different requirements, including an original configuration of 2 twin 9.2-inch guns and 4 twin 7.5-inch guns, etc. Going through all those. But she gets refitted at some point, and she retains the gun fit. She's actually a very useful ship for the Greeks. And during World War I, she doesn't see much surface because of the national schism in many ways. She's seized by the French in 1916 and only returned to Greece after they entered the war on the side of the Allies in June 1917. Basically, the French are going, you can only have a warship that you could actually use to fight a war if you're agreeing to fight on our side in a war. If not, you can't have it. One of the interesting things is she actually sails into Constantinople, or sees a great support from the many Greeks in Constantinople at the end of the war, and takes part in the Greco-Turkish War, supporting landings in East Thrace, does all sorts of things. And in 1937, she attended the Coronation Naval Review in Spithead. She was the only one of the 150 vessels present in 1937 that had also been present at the previous Coronation Review in 1911. George VI actually mentioned this when he welcomed Averoff's captain, and said because of this he felt he should have been welcoming Averoff's captain first, as of course she would have precedence amongst the ships because she had arrived first, because she technically arrived for the previous coronation in 1911. It was a very nice joke, which all the naval captains laughed at, because of course they hadn't been greeted like that, because they'd done it in order of honor and status and those sort of things. But saying it made everyone laugh. It's good naval diplomacy. Leonhard X-ray. For a wing turret, it looks like a very partial setup. For wing turrets, it's a very sensible setup, because those are wing turrets which the guns you actually don't mind firing aren't going to rip your ship apart every time they fire forwards. Although I would prefer a standardized gun armament, I will accept this to an extent. And fine. The British armoured cruisers. The British do produce many. The Minotaur class, though, are, of course, the last armoured cruisers. And the Minotaur class are... Hello! Hopefully that's back. Sorry about that. I'm not sure where you lost me. We have been having some trouble with the internet, but I think I had got it back. And hopefully that's back. Hopefully that's back. Oh. Right. I'm not sure what happened there. I do apologize. I don't know. We lost you talking about the Minotaur class. Well, I was basically saying the Minotaur class were a bit of a... This is why I shouldn't have the chat blocking that screen. Because if I have the chat blocking that screen, then I don't see when it goes wrong. And I don't think it went wrong for long. I don't think it went wrong for long because I got alert fairly quickly, but hopefully that... You've been cut at the beginning of Minotaurs. Ollie? It's all sorted now. You don't have to worry. Thank you for help. Go on. Good boy. So, the Minotaur class, there is no real excuse for building them. They shouldn't have been built. Because at this point, the Royal Navy's already building battle cruisers. If you are going to build them as heavy cruiser style sort of armored cruisers with an all 9.2 inch gun armament. That would have made sense. You know, they displace... Sorry, I had to shut down all my windows and all my files to get everything working. They displace nearly 15,000 tons. So if they've been armed with 9.2 inch guns all along, maybe, I don't know, a dreadnought style arrangement of 9.2 inch guns, they would have been a freaking fearsome vessel. And you think about that outline of that ship, you could probably have done that. Double 9.2 inch turrets the whole way along, a broadside of 10 9.2s, well, 8 9.2s. That's a fearsome broadside, and able to fire 6 forward, able to fire 6 aft. It would have been a very effective cruiser, and would have probably set the mold for what heavy cruisers would have been into the interwar years, which means they might have been more pragmatic. But that's not what the British did. And the British build them, and then they go, right, we're not building anymore. They don't make sense. They don't, you know, they're just not... They're not viable to build these sort of ships. And that's the sort of the thing. Which is sensible, but it takes them long enough to get there. It does take them long enough to get there. And the next class of cruisers, really powerful large cruisers they build, of course, the Cavendish and Hawkins class, which are interesting, shall we say. Interesting, definitely. Hello, everyone, and sorry for what happened. I have no idea what did happen. It just we've got troubles with the internet here. But yeah, I'm not a fan of this class. I don't think they're really sensible, and don't think they're really viable. You might hear there is a big fluffy thing currently complaining and wanting to go back inside. I think he thinks there's something going on outside or home. So I will be quickly going to put Raleigh back in the house. So I'll be back in about a minute. Sorry, 30 seconds maybe. Oh, come on, Fluff. Let's go. Let's get you to come. Bum, bum. What do you think is out here? Well, as they say, never work with children, animals, or dodgy internet. I like working with animals, though, and dodgy internet isn't that problem. The FRA wanted to go back to the house. I think he heard weird noises. But no, I'm not a fan of these ships. I do not think they are necessary or justify their expenses at all. So, here are some of the critical actions of the Mediterranean. And the SMS Goeben, Breslau, blockade of Austria-Hungary, evacuation of the Serbian army, all these things. Honestly, armoured cruisers are not that useful to any of them. I'm also fairly sure the image is being degraded at some point. Actually, no, it appears to be working now. Sorry about that. And as you know, as I say, HMS Defence got clobbered at Jutland. And if there is a class of ships which shouldn't have been at Jutland, it's probably any of the later armoured cruisers. Because the trouble is, they thought they were armoured enough they might have a chance of surviving. Whereas the early ones, they knew they didn't. So they wouldn't. They pushed where they would have actually been sensible not pushing. And again, if they built a Dreadnought-style cruiser, so they had the battle cruisers and they'd had these sort of heavy cruisers with 9.2-inch guns, they'd have been very sensible. You think, if you had taken something the size of this, which is 14,800 tons, you'd fit it with Dreadnought-style arrangement of 9.2-inch guns, given it turbine power, you would probably be talking about a 30-knot ship. And that would have been incredibly useful. But as useful as armoured cruisers are in these operations, there is not a single operation here which I can say, hand on heart or battle, they were decisive for. Or really their skills were suitable for. Because again, they are the pre-Dreadnought era's answer to the battlecruiser. Fast enough to run away from anything that can... well, theoretically. Reality is they couldn't. Because none of them were really fast enough to run away from the things that would run after them. Other than maybe some of the bigger British ones. And that's because the British were prepared to put in the cost to do it. The thing is with all these things, it's how much money you're willing to put in. It's how much money you're willing to actually add in. Or you'll get out what you get put in. But anyway, let's start off with actually answering the question. And the question that has come up, as this one is, were they useful? Can't be asked, but even squeezing 26 to 27 knots out of HMS Defence would have been a great improvement. Turbines. Hello, Blue Ship Butter. The question, posed at the beginning by our lovely patron, Carl McGasberg, is Armoured Cruisers in the Mediterranean Model 1. Actions, losses, kills, and impact. Well, the actions are fair, but not many, and we've talked about that. Their losses, considering their number they were there could have been more lost, but they're not really risked as much because the Mediterranean doesn't really have the impact or the sort of the area for them to operate, so they're really not often up in the higher threat areas. Their kills, not as many as they would hope. In fact, not enough to really justify. their impact. Well, this is the more difficult thing to say. How can you judge the impact of a ship when things don't happen because it's present? Do we know if things don't happen? Jero Khan, hello. The Kriegsmarine had the same, the Kaiserliche Marine had the same idea with Blucher at Dogger Bank. But could the British or Germans really foresee their uselessness? I think when you are already building an all big gun ship, you have to ask yourself why you're building a mixed gun ship. That's the question. If you're building a ship, if let's say you already have gone to great expense, you're building a battleship which has all one caliber of guns and is designed around this idea because that is the most sensible idea from terms of firepower engagement, logistics, technology, all sorts of things, then why do you design this? Why go for a mixed gun ship? So, honestly, anyone which is built post 1905, I will agree ones which are entering service 1907, 1908, because many of them were designed after 1905, before 1905. But anything which is designed 1906 onwards, which is not focusing, standardization of guns, standardization, is not showing an awareness of the realities of the time and the viabilities of the time. And any navy which does it is frankly being silly. Again, I'll accept the Blucher because the Germans aren't really a major navy at the time. They're thinking they're a major navy, but they're not really a major navy when they're making a decision. It's their first generation of semi-ship. And the British are building battle cruisers at the same time they are building the Minotaur class. So it really doesn't make sense to me. The Minotaur class as all 9.2-inch cruisers makes sense. If you consider that, if you started churning out in 1906 turbine-powered 15,000 ton 9.2 10 maybe 12 9.2-inch gun cruisers, think how much firepower you'd have by the time of World War One. Think how useful they'd be in World War One. There wouldn't be a single armored cruiser that could stand against them for starters. Again, the British could probably have quite easily churned out 3 or 4 a year. And yes, these start building in 1905. They're completed they're sort of completed in 1909. Although some of them start later. You could have churned out these ships. You could have churned them out based on those ideas. You can argue to an extent the British stop building and laying down these ships the moment they have the battle cruisers, but that means they actually focus in on the battle cruisers and they don't have the heavy cruiser, which is a big break in their line. So if they'd started off with the Minotaur class as the first dreadnought cruisers, and the dreadnoughts, and I know the Minotaurs technically start earlier than the dreadnoughts, but if they could have done conversion on the stocks, you can never convince me that the Royal Navy, with all its resources of constructors, etc., couldn't have converted these ships on the stocks quite quickly. The fact that they weren't ordered with turbines in 1905, even if it's in January 1905, upsets me. The fact that they're not all 9.2-inch guns upsets me. You know, these things, they could have been a basis, and a very sensible basis, for the British going forward. You also then probably end up with, interwar years, as 6-inch, 7,500 tons for light cruisers, and 15,000 ton 9.2 inch for heavy cruisers. At which point, if the Germans built the Graf, the Pocket Deutschland class, they would really have to be something weird. Absolutely. Could the armored cruiser squadron that was to intercept Govan really do something to her? In favourable conditions, of course, close night fight. The whole point was they had torpedoes. She didn't have. Goban doesn't have match armor. The theory was they could have bashed away at her. She'd have probably won, but she'd have got damaged. Remember, again, Royal Navy has 57 armoured cruisers. That's the difference. When we talk today about that squadron, that's a big squadron for the Royal Navy to be potentially chucking away. But any damage they cause to Goban is going to slow her down and mean that the pre-dreadnoughts or perhaps the battle cruisers will be able to catch her. Anything that slows down Goban is bad for Goban. And they might sink her. They have torpedoes. Their guns are heavy enough. If they manage to converge on her from multiple directions and are well organised, they could win. Gerald Crown, can you give an overview of the process of accepting a certain built plant warship in Britain, say in 1905? The process starts off with the Admiralty Board, the Sea Lords. And it starts off with two officers on the Sea Lords, the first and the third Sea Lords. First Sea Lord will say, I foresee this operational requirement. And that might be due to information coming back from the CNCs, might be due to their own experience. That's what I'll do. He will talk with the third Sea Lord about it. The third Sea Lord will then take it to the Department for the Director of Naval Construction, and who will then have a team assemble under their leadership various options, which will go backwards and forwards between the third Sea Lord until you have about 3 or 4 options for filling that role. Then that will be taken to the Admiralty Board. The Admiralty Board will then look at it, and if they like it, they'll put it out to tender. Now, this is a rough, broad-speaking design. A far more detailed design will go out to tender to the various shipyards. It might go to a Royal Navy shipyard, in which case, as in the Minotaur class, they are built by Devonport, Chatham, and Pembroke. So they are built by Royal Navy-owned yards, actual government-owned shipyards. So they go to the yards, and the things go backwards and forwards between the DNC and the yards, and they get developed and built. If it goes out to commercial tender, so commercial yard, again, the process is much the same, but it's a lot more rigid in terms of the information going backwards and forwards, because it has to be, because it's a commercial order. So you have to make the DNC is very careful, because they know that whereas the yards they earn are not about profit, they're about delivering the best ships they can for the Royal Navy, although they wouldn't mind a profit, but that's not really how they think about it. They don't think about it in terms of profit, they think about it in terms of payment for the various people involved. The commercial yards are out for a profit. And if they can skimp, or possibly get away with something and make some money of it, they might well do it. So the DNCs take very, very careful eyes on them. Keep very careful eyes on them. Now, there is also always a break in tradition in that sometimes you get a slight difference in that the yard comes forward, or especially commercial builders, come forward with proposals. They get a politician on side to back them, and then they come and present their proposals to the board. Now, this is where things get interesting, because there is the narrative, at which point they go off and build it, and it's amazing. But the truth is that then gets passed to the director of naval construction through the third Sea Lord, who looks at the design, weighs it up, probably makes a couple of modifications, just because they can, and then they'll go back to them, and it will be then from that point onwards like any other ship. It will be going backwards and forwards between the third Sea Lord, DNC, and the Admiral to board. So it works on. But that's basically, broadly speaking, how the Royal Navy works, and other navies are not too dissimilar. The American one is slightly dissimilar in that the Americans have the joy that Congress sets the budget for individual ships at some point, and will set the budget for buying cars for naval yards on occasion, and go down as detailed as that. This car will be procured for that naval yard to do staff duties, and this is how much you're going to pay for it, as detailed as that, which is problematic. Whereas the Royal Navy's budgeting is slightly more flexible. Which also allows the Royal Navy to occasionally get ships a lot cheaper for what their quality than the Americans do, because everyone knows how much Congress is setting the price for. Calvin Gaspo, remix main battery. I would be more lenient out to 1908 is semi-justifiable due to fire control. Even after 1908, they'd started building a sensible class of heavy cruiser or armor cruiser with double 9.2-inch guns, it would have been useful. I think David Brown is to an extent right. It's to do with both what you and Carl McCasper said. It's to an extent fire control. It's also to an extent old doctrine. It's also to an extent that other people are still building it, so you might as well build them. It happens. But no. Impact. Well, the armoured cruisers are armoured cruisers. They are as useful as you can imagine an armoured cruiser being. But, and I say this with all the love for them in my heart that you can possibly possess for ships which are really not that amazing by the time they are fighting a big war. Their time had passed. If you had had a big war between the powers in the late 1890s, these ships would have been the battle cruisers of their time. They would have gone around the world ripping into each other, escorting convoys, attacking convoys, everything you can possibly imagine they would have done. But the trouble is, they don't evolve their design into the Dreadnought period, because it immediately jumps up to the battle cruiser, and no one thinks about that. And the Royal Navy is churning out scout cruisers and various other cruisers, and no one's thinking about this sort of ship in between a battle cruiser and the rest of the cruiser force and what they're going to be. And you can tell that by the fact that it's only after the end of World War One they sort of go, you know what? Actually, we need something in the middle. And that is the Hawkins class, the Cavendish Hawkins class, which start construction in 1916. And they're an all 7.5-inch armament and roughly 10,000 tons in standard. Which means, honestly, they are lightly armed. And I would say this is an effect of World War One, because they are more an evolution of the light cruisers, which the Royal Navy's been building up to this point, that has grown up, rather than an armoured cruiser being developed into a heavy cruiser. Which is why when people go, yes, the armoured cruisers become heavy cruisers, I go, no, because there is a stop in the building of the armoured cruisers. They don't. It's the light cruiser split, and the scout. It's basically the scout cruiser grows up into the light cruiser, and the light cruiser grows up into the heavy cruiser. And I would argue that caused a lot of the troubles for World War Two. Because, again, if you'd had your heavy cruisers have 9.2-inch guns from the get-go, they would have been far more powerful units. If they'd been 15,000 tons, not 10,000 tons, as their limit of Washington energy, you can imagine the ships that were being built. Imagine a county with an extra 50% wet displacement budget and armed with 9.2-inch guns. That's not something you want to take on. It's also going to stop half the nations becoming rule breakers. Because on 15,000 tons, you can design a decent heavy cruiser. At which point, you become, what's the value in breaking the rules? Yes, you might still get Japan, etc., breaking the rules, but... And we can therefore blame that on, to an extent, on Jackie Fisher, but also on the British Admiralty, because it's Britain which takes over the armoured cruiser. I know it starts out as the Juna Cole, but Britain builds 57 of them. Britain builds almost as many as, well, actually more than France and Italy and a couple of other nations you can probably add on combined. Britain builds a huge number of armoured cruisers. So Britain is the nation which really takes the armoured cruiser into its heart, which is another reason why I say the armoured cruiser and the Juna Cole. No. Why is the Royal Navy taking on the armoured cruiser? Because actually, for the Royal Navy, it makes a lot of sense. You have a lot of ports around the world, and you want to have presence and control of a lot of warfare in times of war. An armoured cruiser is great for that. It's actually better for the armoured cruiser makes more sense for the Royal Navy than it does for the French. Because the Royal Navy, look at where they're fighting. The Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Oceans. Not Mediterranean, not sea. And that's the trouble for the French. They have to fight in the Mediterranean as well as the Atlantic. And in the Atlantic, their only real enemy is the British, who will look at them strangely and go, where are you going? Because we outnumber you with our armoured cruisers. None of your armoured cruisers in the Mediterranean will get out to the Atlantic because you do not have a canal going from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic. They'd have to go past Gibraltar, where there will probably be a large stock of pre-dreadnoughts going, hello, you coming to say hello? We've got very large 12-inch guns. Hello? Oh, you want to say hi? Hello? There might even have been, if it had happened late enough, there might have been HMS Dreadnought sitting there to go, I just came to say hello. So it doesn't work for the French. But it works for the Royal Navy. And therefore it's the Royal Navy which you have to look to and go, why aren't you building anything? Why aren't you being sensible? Why aren't you continuing on this? Because, again, it makes more sense for the war the British end up fighting. Again, if you'd had some modern dreadnought-style cruisers built with 9.2-inch guns, built by the time of World War One, you can just imagine they would have been the perfect ships to fight at Coronel. They would have been the perfect ships to deploy around the various stations. They would have been the ships you would have deployed around the station because you'd gone, right, at home we have all the battle cruisers and all the dreadnoughts. So what are they deploying out? The new armoured cruisers. And they'd be deployed around the world. At which point, von Space sitting there going, I'm going to come face to face with one of those? That's not fair. The Scharnhorst class cruisers, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, were armed with 8.3-inch guns. So they are fairly solidly armed, and 4 in 2 twin turrets and 4 singly mounted. So the equivalent to that would have been these ones are built between 1905 and 1908, and in service 1907 to 1980. You have it coming along. Yes, they're also armed with 6 5.9-inch guns and 18 3.5-inch guns, but it makes sense. Go for the all-gun armament. Make it sensible. Make it sensible and safe for your forces. Come, hello. I'm finally home after another late night opening at Mountain Warehouse. Done 75% of them, Basar. Cool. I'm hoping you're getting extra money for that. Yes, turbine and unified main battery and fire control in a few years kills the armor cruiser. Hmm. A 7.5 inches, 19 centimeters. In Austro-Hungarian infantry, it shells doubles the weight of the 6-inch, 15 centimeter shell. You're on current. Any armored cruiser preserved anywhere? I know of the USS Olympia in state somewhere. There is the Juros Stavros, which is in Greece. And I think the Japanese might have one around somewhere. I'm not sure, though. One is a museum in Vienna. There was a never built and never properly designed 4 twin 90 centimeters armored Austro-Hungarian armored cruiser built between the Radetskis and to be built between the design built organized between Radetskis and Tegnovs. Got ditched for their rapid cruisers. A 27 plus knot 4,000 tonish light cruisers. Spawn, Hegel, Inside, and Navarra. Yes, which makes sense for the Adriatic. It's the Aegean, Adriatic. It makes sense for them to have that. Again, we go through this. When you're dealing with the Adriatic, you either have to be fast enough to blitz past the Italians, or you have to fight your way past the Italians. You don't have any choice. And the trouble is, 20 odd knots is not it. Now, I'll just say I have a warning coming up about bitrate and the stream's bitrate, so I'm not sure what's happening on that front. We have been having trouble, I've said, all day with the YouTube. We've been with the internet. We've been having trouble all week with the internet. We've got an engineer finally coming out next week. Okay, it seems to be okay now. Pigeon, Olympic is not an armored cruiser, it's a protected cruiser. There is the SX SMS Vodorog Yugoslav Monitor Slava in Belgrade. I think it's literally. I think the Greek one is probably of the Giuseppe Garibaldi class. Is probably the not Giuseppe Garibaldi class of the Pisa class. The Georgios Avrov, not Stavrov, as I just said. Stavros is a completely different gentleman. We won't go there. Right, no, she's preserved as a floating museum. Even though she's a museum ship, she's crewed and regarded as active service, carrying the rear admiral's rank flag, a square blue flag with white cross. Wow. And apparently she sells again. And wanders around. They're planning on making a Steam movie. That'd be fun. Sorry about that. Got distracted reading the story of the Georgios Ovaros and the various talking about making a sale again. Georgios Ovaros actually fired a few times in anger. Richard Order, what World War One, World War Two cruiser would you like to see orcs get a hold of and make ready for battle? Oh, good lord. That's a question and a half. You know, honestly, and I say this with all the love in my heart for it, but honestly, I couldn't imagine anything more orc than these. One of the four, either Ernest Penan, Jules Mochet, or Agda Quinge, all could be quite happily orcified. I can imagine them being the orc ships because, let's be honest, orc ships always look slightly overdone, and anything with 6 funnels looks slightly overdone. It does. Come on, you can preserve any World War One and World War Two cruiser. What would it be? HMS Arethusa, because I think she deserves it. And I think, honestly, that's a crew. Another reason I preserve her is because I could have stuck her in many different many different places around the country, and she could have been a wonderful little museum ship. Would have had enough space for everyone to wander aboard, but not so big that she has to be in a major yard. So she'd become an attraction. So you could build a naval museum around her. They're trying to make the Georgios Avrov sale again, 1640. Sure, so the French the orcs. I'm saying the French, this particular class, are definitely look orcish to me. Derp Squad, Kalman Gansberg, your various pizza jokes are making me hungry, which is not nice when I haven't had lunch today. There's a reason I'm surviving off chocolate and iron brew. I should have had lunch, but I was dealing with the computers and all sorts of issues and work stuff. I'm prepping for this. I have to prep. There's various questions you all might come up with. So, while we're here, I am going to talk about this. That is the Church of the Cataclysmic Catalina. That is one of the designs available from the lovely store, the store we've got going. The HMS Unicorn picture one has just staying in review. It seems almost permanently with them, with the lovely Spreadshirt people. But this is available. That one's available. I've got rid of some of these designs, I have to say, because I didn't think they'd ever sell. And the thing is that you can get face masks. And the face masks of these will be worn by my aunt and uncle if I get to 13,000 subscribers by December the 31st. So, you know, just a thing. Carmen, first thing I'd like to see a ship preserved in Pembrokeshire. Again, our refuser class would actually have more space. Good. Eric Kaufman. Oh, I have something like in 20 minutes to request my attention. Take care, Eric. Thank you for being here. Carmen. Sorry, I forgot to set up Super Chat password in my bank. I take responsibility for this lunch. No worries. It's all very nice when they happen. Vision, we're having Subway for dinner. Too hot to cook at home. Just hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Ouch. And Melanie, you asked which ship I was talking about earlier. Let's go back to that, because that is the Ernest Reglin Jules Michelet class. Well, technically that's the Ernest Reglin. Ernest Pennon. And the Edgar Quinet class are based on them. It's a very nice idea, Derp Squad, but no, I'm not asking anyone to do that. I want to do this honestly. It's bad juju to win an honor family bragging rights competition dishonestly. I'll take whatever. I don't mind. But what class barrier refusers would be cool? They would be cool. And let's be honest, they could fit quite easily. You could have probably fit HMS Our Refuser. I'm not sure. You could possibly couldn't have fit it in Carnarvon Harbour, but let's be honest, there are a few harbours in the Pembrokeshire area you could have fit that into. Definitely one of the Anglesey ones. Unfortunately, there's none of these preserved. One of the ones preserved comes from the Pisa class. So these ones, but it's the Greek Pisa, not the Italians. So this is these are the Italian vessels. The Italians do a very good job of selling their armored cruiser designs abroad. They really do sell them. Not bad. Good ships. Fun ships. Whew. Internet funds. Internet fun, definitely. I think I'm going to spend tomorrow going back over the cabling again. So, any more questions? How's it all doing? Have I answered all your questions about armoured cruisers in the Mediterranean? And the other question is, of course, is the chat still working? I'm going to test it out. Yeah, it worked. Didn't flash anything at me. The chat is still working. Oh. Madam Productions, hello. Haven't seen you again today. Just curious in Verona. The air fusers, I've heard you say they were used more like large destroyers. Can you elaborate on that? Have a 1700 HMS Penelope. Well, pretty much the air fuser class, when they're being used, are... They have only six 6-inch guns, okay? So, yes, they've got 6-inch guns, but that's honestly not what they're going to use to fight anything which is probably bigger than a destroyer. They're depending on their torpedoes for that. And they have a surprisingly wide arc of fire and very well trained torpedo crews for those cruisers. And they're used heavily on that front. They do dive into attacks. When they're dealing with merchant ships and destroyers, yes, it's 6-inch gunfire all the way. Bang, bang, bang. But the moment that they are on convoy escort duty and they are dealing with larger ships coming at them, we're going to maximum speeds. We've got revolutions up at the highest level. We're eking every knot we can out of these engines, every quarter knot, every half knot, every tenth of a knot we can. We are eking out of these engines, and we are going to get as close to the enemy as possible, and then we are going to launch a spread of torpedoes. And we're basically going to use 6-inch gunfire as 6-inch machine guns, just blasting away as many rounds as we can to cover our approach. So I see a lot of links between the way the tribal class destroyers are used and the arrow fusers are used. And in many ways, that's because they're two sides of the same coin. And to an extent, the Didos. But because the Didos have the role of anti-aircraft cruisers, they're often held back because they have that role. So it's far more bang, bang, bang charge for arrow fusers. It's far more bang, bang, bang charge for the tribals. And the Didos, which you would expect to also take that role, are held back because, well, we need their 5.25s for anti-aircraft and therefore there to protect the carrier and these sort of things. But the arrow fusers and the tribals go straight in. Vision. Now there is no need for my suggested Patreon video and French armoured cruiser designs better than their battleships. Do you want to cause me to have veins popping out my head if that came up? I'd have to actually look at the French battleship designs and the French armoured cruiser designs next to each other. Carmen, our refusers would happily fit in Pembrokeshire Dock Harbour hint. Roses serve into space, and the capacity also has space and depth and naval history. That's good. If the Blackburn was observing an armoured cruiser, same time as a despicable monowing, which plane is flying west? Oh, who knows? I tend to just shut up and watch when I'm not too knowledgeable on specific area of discussion. One I know comparatively little about compared to World War II. Come on, didn't they have some dual-purpose 4-inch too? Yes, some dual-purpose 4-inch, but that's not really much help. But it does mean they, have them along. They're useful. Richard Orta, that's just the jokes on the pizza class. Pizza. Not pizza. Or as my grandfather used to refer it to as pizza. He just thought that was what the Zeds meant, and no one had he was such a lovely gentleman, no one had the heart to correct him. He called it Pizza Hut. Paul Johnson. Well, if you're going to base it on a town class hull, then in the nicest way, you're going to get probably, considering the space a 9.2-inch gun would take up versus a 6-inch gun, your best bet is to take the Belfast hull, and you might just about have space for. You might have space for your 9.2-inch guns if you really reorganize it, but probably you're going to need to go with 6. To be honest, if I was my ideal World War II cruiser would be to take probably the town class idea, up its power a bit, its horsepower, and up its length so it becomes more in the region of 15,000 tons and dead added the 9.2-inch guns. And then I could get the Trebles 9.2s. This is the whole thing. Again, this is my big problem with the armoured cruisers being dropped. Because without them, you don't have the case for the 15,000-ton heavy cruisers. And really, you need 15,000-ton cruisers if you're going to do World War II properly. That is really the sweet spot you need. Dope Squad. I don't think the tribal class ever really decided what they were. Whether they were very heavy destroyers or very light cruisers. They were just the tribal class. and that's what they were first introduced as, and eventually they're grouped together as the Tribal class destroyers. But yeah, they don't ever really acknowledge this. But it does mean they have a 4-inch if they when they need a 4-inch, they have a 4-inch. Yeah, Carl, that does help for the RF users. Honestly, if I'm going to ditch the 6-inch guns for anything, as you say, 9 is plenty. If I'm building a light cruiser, and I'd be tempted, probably, to go with more 4-inch twins, but I would also add in a lot more 40mm. You need 40mm haze mares. If you can, some octuple pom-poms are always good as well. And US engines, very high pressure, small tube boilers engines would probably be useful. As you say, Dan Freeman. They would be useful. Right. Let's see, what have they got coming out next? Well, we have Brew Ships 56 on Sunday, providing the internet is working, crossing fingers. It's theoretically going to be a book review one, but it might, if the internet's playing up, it might be a Q&A one over my phone using internet broadcast capability. Let's see. Suedo a patron on 2nd of September using the 1966 Defense White Paper. And there is a long patrol coming out for that one, which is the British geostrategic situation in the 1960s. So you can understand where the 1966 defense paper comes from. And right, we also have coming up Brew Ships 57, theoretically on the 5th of September. Again, I have warned you that could end up being a Q&A one from my phone, depending on where I am, and depending on internet access. A number of productions. The Dutch Navy's the 7 Provinciën class keels were laid pre-World War II and completed post-World War II. Are there any drawings of what their original design configuration was to be? I think so, but I can't remember where I found them on the internet, but I did find them on the internet once. That's good. Would it be possible to use a common hull for a light and heavy cruiser? Take Belfast Edinburgh hull and build for both 666 and twin 8-inch turrets? Inefficient, but quite possible. You would have had to actually lengthen the hull slightly. Viable, but you would have to want to lengthen the hull slightly if you're going to do that as another thing, because your 8-inch guns, etc., do put certain stresses on the hull, and you want to be slightly beamier for them, and to maintain the same Q and coefficient in terms of its ability through the water, you would need to be longer to deal with the greater beam. Mediteranean Productions. Also, this bothered me for the last few days since Drax covering of the multiclass. Would a larger carrier necessitate larger RFA ships? You could do it with larger RFAs, or you could do it with slightly more RFAs. You could do it either way. But not really. Not that much larger. A bit larger, but not much larger. WWI could the Alaskas be considered armor cruisers? Yes, they fill that hole. The Alaskas are massive when you compare them to heavy cruisers, which is why people call them battle cruisers. But if you've taken the projection of an armored cruiser, as it would probably have grown to about the 1940s, you probably end up with a vessel about the same size as the Alaskas. I'm really happy my museum reopens on September 9th. Cool! That's good. My main thought was about commonality machinery, both maintaining ships and the shipyards and our production facilities. You could do that very easily. Commonality machinery is easy to achieve. The hull is the problem. But even that, it's not that much of a problem. If you're saying, right, we're going to build a slightly bigger, slightly stronger hull so it can take the 8-inch guns, that's not going to worry anyone who ends up with the 6-inch guns. Because that's going to mean they're going to have a slightly faster, slightly more heavily armoured, more survivable ship with more space for other things in there. And a lot more 6-inch rounds. No one's going to be upset at that. To what extent did turbines have commonality of complex bits like to make like turbine blades? More than probably you'd think, but less than you'd hope for. Especially in the first years. Because the blade and the systems were individually cast. And I should warn you now, there is a orange light of death up above me. Which is something I worry about on the broadband. So I think I'm on borrowed time with this internet. So I'm probably going to end this now. Or at least shortly. Because I'm worried it's going to go again. Hopefully that didn't go circle screen on you. That's good, still there. But as I said, I'm watching that orange light above my head with worry. Richard Order. What if the French managed to acquire all the good plans needed for a cruiser to fill the speed, armor, and firepower, best guns, engine, armor, but use the same system to make the patchwork fleet? Then it won't help. Honestly, that's the French problem. The French problem is their yards are very, very far apart and they don't have... Let's put it this way. If the DNC and the Third Sea Lord turn up in your yard and you're not producing to their specifications, they will crucify you and the British government will back them up in doing it. If their French counterparts turned up in a French yard and were unhappy, the politicians would side with the yard. Paul Johnson, would this be a bad time to mention I'm a telephone engineer? Not that bad, Paul, but, you know, don't worry. I'm probably going to end up having to lay new cables. I have that feeling for out here. I'm going to end up having to lay new cables because the electricians put them in very nicely and they are put in, but I have a feeling I'm going to end up needing to bury them and put them in a buried protection. Instead of, as it is currently, they're going along the fence and they're in their protective cabling all the way along and all the way around. And I have a feeling I'm going to end up needing to rip up the path and bury them underneath some concrete. Either that, I'll put them in slightly stronger tubing. So this is what we've got coming up. And of course, in October, we have HMS Dreadnought Day. Favorite dreadnoughts and battleships and battle cruisers, please keep sending them through to me, and I will see which are the most popular ones. And in 8th of October, we have the Battle of Kentish Knock. Right now, everything is still working at the moment. Cables and rodents. Yeah, that's what's worrying me. It's that or the broadband is really, really mucking about, in which case I am going to be having interesting words with our providers, because we pay a lot of money for it. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Take care. I hope you've had a nice evening. I hope I've answered all your questions. And I'm going to go off and make some food now, because I'm hungry. So, thank you. And I'm hoping this is working and saying goodbye, because, just playing fun today. And as said, at 9:30, should have gone live. He says it should have gone live. Yeah. Well, I hope it's working, because if it isn't working, it's a problem. Thank you, DJ40. Thank you, Calvin Gasbert. Thank you, Abazaski. Thank you, Richard Orta. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Melly6040. Thank you, Dan Freeman. Thank you, Calvin Gasbert. Thank you, Paul Jensen. Thank you, everyone. Take care.